right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. You are here with us at In-Depth Connections, a Black Light for the Culture. I'm your host, Lee, and why don't we dive right in with the mission statement. So we strive to rejuvenate and reconnect the community with itself amidst the general social climates we face as a society. At the same time, we strive to inspire self-reflection within our listeners and viewers, as well as those who may participate in the discussions. Using this as a basis, we aim to express the topics covered here interpretively through film to create greater vehicles for social awareness and social justice. Today, I would like for the focus of our discussion to be on the following topic, and that's Black culture as it pertains to Black women in their pursuit of success through education. Now, this is going to be a part two to the discussion that we had just a couple of weeks back. And today, here with me, I have my special guest, Miss Natalie Bryan. She is a licensed clinical social worker, and she actually has her own podcast, Mentally Wealthy, so be on the lookout for that. So how are you doing today, Miss Natalie?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
That's good to hear. Would you mind telling us just a little bit about yourself and your background?
Yes, my name is Natalie Bryan. I am the owner of Restoring Harmony Counseling and Consulting. I'm also the founder of Pearl, which is a nonprofit here in the Augusta region, well, the local CSRA. And Pearl is an acronym standing for Providing Education and Advocacy to Rebuild Lives. I go out and I educate, communicate, teach on mental health and mental wellness in our community.
Wow, that is really beautiful.
Thank you.
Definitely going to make sure to drop some links and information down in the description here, but that is a beautiful thing, and I think we have a fantastic guest here for today. So, the topic, Black culture, Black women, their success through education. Why don't you tell me, what's your first impressions hearing something like that?
Definitely, when I hear something like that, I think immediately of challenge, because I just think that Black women coming from our background of struggle in a lot of our population, and I'm not saying that every Black woman struggles, and not just struggle economically. I'm talking about emotionally, I'm talking about mentally, and I'm talking about socially. When it comes to Black women, there is always a space or caveat or room where we're kind of just disregarded. You know, you recognize why we are the least paid, the least recognized, the least, even though our population is the most educated. So.
Okay, wow, that's very powerful, very powerful. And thank you for sharing your perspective on that. I know when I think about, Black women and, their pursuit of success through education, I don't know, the first thing that comes to mind is just resilience, just because I feel like, they have such a unique experience when it comes to the stresses and the different things that you have to face as you navigate this society. I know, I've gone through, the educational space and I felt a lot of the tensions, but I know that there are a lot of unique caveats to the experience that Black women have to face, such as like misogyny and, sexism and different things that can just really double down on the large looming obstacle that is, this world that we live in. So I know when it comes to, I guess, this overall discussion, some of the main things that I want to talk about are probably, the treatment of Black girls, before they reach college, once they get to college, when they get into the workplace, and then overall, what is the impact that something like that can have on, the psychological state of, a Black child or a Black woman. So really, what is your impression of the Black girl experience in academia as it stands today?
I love that you said earlier about your take on Black women is resilience, and I think coming up as a Black girl myself, it is children overall are resilient, but I think there is kind of a special place for Black girls because they are in this space of not being looked at or treated or having the real opportunity to experience girlhood. I think they start off so young, parentified if they have siblings, or the word you mentioned earlier, adultification, and they're not looked at as little girls, so they're overly sexualized. So the innocence that I think our young Black girls have on the inside is not always deemed or looked at when people perceive them on the outside. So it's always a challenge for them in every situation to know how to navigate the room, even in spaces that are supposed to be safe for them. For example, with family, for example, with extended relatives, friends, social circles. You know, when your uncle is over sexualizing you because your shorts are too short, but you have on the same shorts as your friends. You know, maybe your thighs are a little thicker or your breasts are a little bit more developed. And even though your body is big, you're still a very innocent child. So, you know, I do think that young Black girls are resilient, but I think for me, it's always sad because they are not given the opportunity to always fully develop in spaces where they feel safe, loved, and protected. And so it's always survival.
Right.
And I think that for me is what I tend to see with our young Black girls. So the resilience is there, which is a powerful thing, but also they shouldn't always have to be in circumstances where they are not looked at as little girls.
Right. I think what really stuck with me the most from what you just said was knowing how to navigate that space. And it really stands out a lot to me that you would say something like a Black girl should need to know, you know, how to navigate within a space, as though they're not still within a space where they're learning and they're still developing. And so how could you possibly know already how to navigate such treacherous waters? And it really kind of calls, I feel like, us, you know, who are in a position to protect, you know, those that are coming behind us to do something, to call attention to, you know, this disparity that at this point it's becoming proven because people are starting to do studies and to really look into the experience of the Black girl and, you know, why it, you know, is contributing to the outcome of where they're able to get to, in, you know, when it comes to later in life and things of that nature. You know, so the Center for Poverty and Inequality, you know, they did a study, and it's called Girlhood Interrupted, and it's a very powerful study that it really takes a groundbreaking approach at quantifying the experience that Black girls have in comparison to their peers, and especially to, you know, the white girls that they're right next to in class, because a lot of times the teachers and the people that are in figures or positions of authority that look over them, they don't look like them, and so being able to draw the difference between the way that, you know, a Black child is disciplined versus a white child is important, not to promote any conversation about racism, but to identify something that is already inherently happening so that you can actually do something about it.
Absolutely.
I guess from your own experience, what are some things that we can do in our own households to, I guess, address the Black girl experience of not really like being protected or feeling protected?
Absolutely. I think people don't realize that a lot of our mental health and our mental wellness stems from our environment and who we learn from. So we parent how we were parented. So a lot of times it is us unlearning some inappropriate behaviors and modeling and teaching our children through our behaviors what to do in certain situations. When you look at a household, if you come in a household where parents are anxious all the time, that child, even though that child doesn't have anxiety, that child will respond or answer circumstances, situations, and questions in the way that they saw their parents respond. Even though they're not anxious, their response is going to be anxious because that's how they saw mom and dad deal with the circumstance. So if we are going to have change happen, we have to emulate that change, model it. And as much as it is a struggle for us to relearn behavior, it's also going to be challenging for them to acclimate. But when you're a child, you're younger, the acclimation is a little bit easier. The challenge is going to be in us, recognizing where we are, what our limitations are, where we should improve, and then modeling that behavior for our kids. Right. Because they don't know any better, but we do. Mm-hmm. And so if we want change, we have to initiate the change.
Yeah, I definitely heard that, and I agree with that. And I think it definitely helps to start the discussion at home, to, prepare them mentally for, what it is that they're getting ready to get into. Because it is a situation where others are going to look at you and others are going to treat you differently simply because of the way that you look. And I feel like by, having that conversation and that discussion at home before, going out into, spaces where you're made to interact with others, it puts a large, I feel like, a bit of readiness on them, to where I feel like some of these things don't catch them so off guard, to where it can knock you down so much to where you feel like you can't do something or you feel like such an outsider. But at the same time, I feel like it's probably more something for the community to really take an approach, to really come against. Because when I think about the Black girl experience, I feel like it's something that you have to be more hands-on when it comes to protecting, children. And I feel like things like maybe policy or legislation or something like that. I'm not really sure, just because I'm not really experienced in that space. But I know you coming from a social work perspective. What would you say are some things from, I guess, like a social perspective you could do to, I guess, promote or advocate for Black girls and the experience that they have?
Education, education, education. And when I talk about that, not just in schools, not just in spaces where you're supposed to learn, but in spaces like churches, in spaces like community centers, in spaces where we're talking about Black girls in a normative way as being little girls. Yeah. And I think that would help. Is it going to change overnight? No, because we epigenetically, which is cellularly, hold trauma within our genes. You know what I'm saying? So a lot of our learned behavior, a lot of our responses, especially for people in the Black community, when you're thinking about it from the post-traumatic slave syndrome aspect of things, we do things inherently because of what was learned and passed down, whether by watch or cellularly. And I think it's going to take time for that trauma to be healed, even though we are working on the healing process, but for it to become a normative thing that the trauma is no longer passed in the way that it was epigenetically.
Wow. You said post-traumatic slave syndrome.
Yes, sir.
Could you, I guess, give a broader definition? I don't think I've ever heard that.
Yeah, Dr. Joy DeGruy, she wrote a book about the post-traumatic slave syndrome, and she talks about how a lot of our behaviors today stem from, and our engagements with others stem from our history of being slaves or coming from that trauma background, and just things that we do sometimes innately that other people don't do because that has not been their lived experience. You have to think a lot of slaves and things of that nature. Think about the strong Black woman mantra and title that we give, you know what I'm saying? Or, we always have to have our Superwoman cape on and always show strength and not show weakness. That is stuff that's really descended from that area, because you have to think about it. When you were a slave, if you showed weakness or illness or inability, you died. So a lot of times it is stop crying. You don't need to stop. You got to keep going. You have to be 10 times better, 12 times better, things of that nature. And a lot of those things are things that stem from this is what we need to do to survive. And we continue to perpetuate those things, even though at times it's to our own detriment. Our anxiety is through the roof. We are walking around in functional depression. We have mental health treatments. We have mental health illnesses that we don't even go in to get treated because we don't want to be seen as someone who needs help. Right. And that is the challenge that a lot of people of color face, that we are fighting against, not just societal norms, but we're fighting against the things that we are dealing with within our own culture.
Right.
And I think that causes a lot of that. Well, it causes another layer to be added to the things that we deal with daily.
Right. And so would you say that post-traumatic slave syndrome can be, I guess, a driver of the way that Black parents themselves are raising their own children?
Absolutely.
In the way that they may not be as tender or as soft with them because of the way that, maybe they hadn't been, treated that way by their parents, but then you look all the way back and it has its roots in that weakness or that softness that
Absolutely. If I show you that I love you, and the slave master knows you're my favorite child or whatever, most slaves don't get to keep their children. They take their children. But if, hey, the slave master allows me to keep my sons around because they're strong sons or whatever, but I show you a little bit more favor or curry a little more favor with you, and that slave, he's going to get me to behave in the manner in which I want to behave, or that child leaves, or that child goes. Or if I show that, he's ill or there's a weakness or whatever, then you're sold off or you're killed. You know what I'm saying? So a lot of the things that behaviors that we do that we think are very natural stems from a space of survival.
Wow, I never thought about that perspective of it coming from, that, and that entirely being, a driver in how you're treating your own family, and how it can almost be like a sense of veiled love, almost because, like, genetically you're just not. You're not predisposed to show those kinds of things, and it makes its way into your culture.
Yeah. Think about back in the day when parents took care of kids. I know especially, but I'm not going to say this part doesn't necessarily have to be just African American homes, but I know that we come from a space where, love wasn't shown to you as affection and hugs and nurturing. It was shown that you have a roof over your head, you have food on the table, you have clothes on your back, you get to go to school, you don't have to work. That was love. I've provided more than what I was given the opportunity to receive. That was love. Not the nurturing of, my child needs a hug, or my son is allowed tears, or my daughter is allowed to, stay in as opposed to being put out. Those things impact how our children develop, because our engagement with them, how we treat them, that emotional intelligence makes a big difference. Our attachment makes a big difference in how they develop in our community.
And would you say that is has a positive influence or a negative influence on, I guess, some of these the reasons why children are disciplined, like outbursts and disobedience and harassment and bullying and fighting? You would think that parents want their kids to come up and they want the best for their children, and so they try to prepare them for the world. But would you say that some of those things and the way that they're being raised are the reasons why you see some of these outbursts?
I think sometimes with outbursts, a lot of times our Black children aren't seen as innocent, and sometimes when, how many times do you allow things to just go by and you're always the blame for something, and you're not allowed to speak up for yourself, or it's seen as angry, and you're not allowed to express yourself and speak to the higher ups because you're going to get in trouble because it's disrespectful, and you're not allowed. So what happens if you continue to suppress your feelings and emotions all the time, not feel heard and not feel validated? You'll explode. Right. It'll just come out of you. And if adults have a problem with being able to regulate their emotions when they're feeling some sort of way, how do you think our kids are doing that? Especially if that's how communication happens in their home.
Right. And so let me ask you this, put that into perspective with, so there was a study done on the difference in how, black girls are disciplined as a result of the way that they behave in academic spaces. And, it's found that for things like disruptive behavior, so like speaking up or speaking out in class, black girls are 3 times as likely to be disciplined for the same thing that that their white counterparts may have done. What do you think about something like this?
I think that, black girls aren't seen as black girls. They're seen as young women. So they're not seen as in space or place to make mistake. I think I've always talked about how we teach our children, we take away their autonomy, especially in our community, never disrespecting elderly people, never, our autonomy is taken away from us very young when it comes to people of authority, because go over there and hug Uncle so-and-so and go kiss Auntie, whatever. And then when you don't want to, you're kind of forced, don't be disrespectful, don't be angry. So your no is taken away. And it's taken away a lot. So how do you think that stems into places like school, workplace environments, where your no's are constantly disregarded and not heard?
So would you say that this is an example that black girls are more disruptive? Would you say that this statistic is evidence that they are more disruptive, or would you say that this is evidence that the response is different, and that really the disruption that you see on each side is likely the same?
Mm-hmm. Disruption on each side is more than likely the same, but I think that inherently, societally, we're just taught black is wrong. If you look at our history of culture and everything like that, movies, every time you see a villain, they're in black. Every time you see someone who's evil, they're a darker complexion, or, you know what I'm saying? Every single time, if you go back even to silent movies, that it's always perceived. They even did a study with cops, and I don't remember the study, please don't judge me on it. But they did a study on cops when it came to police violence and African-American people and pulling the trigger. And they were testing how the police officers pulled the trigger in regards to incidents. And they found that they pulled the trigger so many more times when the party was black.
More times.
More times. Not necessarily about what the circumstance was, not necessarily about environment or whatever. It was the perception. And think about that when these are the people that determine whether we live or die or go home every day. Right. It's a weight and responsibility for the officer, but it's also a weight and a responsibility for us that lives in the community and have to decide, do I stand up for myself or do I make it home? Right.
And really, it starts very young. That school to prison pipeline is something very, very real. There have been numerous studies that shown that black girls or black children are almost 3 times as likely to be given an out of school suspension for something that any of their counterparts may have done the same exact thing. And there's also statistics that show that when you're on out-of-school suspension, you're more likely to get into deeper trouble that could pull you away from school even further. There's a study, and it's called the Essence of Innocence, and it's called The Consequences of Dehumanizing Black Children, and it talks about how police themselves at very, very young ages, they overestimate the age of a black child on average by as much as 4.5 years. 4.5 years. And could you imagine, having a 6-year-old and thinking they were a 10-year-old, or a 10-year-old and thinking they were a 15-year-old, or having a 14-year-old and thinking they were 18. And so it drastically changes the response, and it drastically changes the perception of whether this is innocence or whether this is a misdemeanor, or is this a felony that may be happening. And more often than not, the assumption is that it is a felony, when it comes to a black person.
But what if it wasn't a crime and it was just a kid's exuberance? Because kids are, they're just excited. They want to, I have nieces right now, and one niece is 16, the other niece is 12, and my 12-year-old almost is double the size of my 16-year-old. She looks like she's the older sister, but she is 12 years old. And sometimes she doesn't remember how big her body is. Sometimes she doesn't recognize how developed she is compared to her other peers. And, she may be perceived as someone who may be aggressive or, trying to over-sexualize herself. And she's looking at all her other 12-year-old friends, and she just wants to be like her 12-year-old friends. Right. And they have a lot of energy, and they're very exuberant, and they very much so want to do this and throw their bodies here and all this other stuff in innocence. But when people look at her, she's not looked at the same rate as her good friends.
Right. I mean, you look at like a Tamir Rice.
Mm-hmm.
There's a child that was playing,
yeah.
And the response was so drastic, just because of the perception of who this was and what the assumption of what he was doing was. But this was a child,
yes.
And I would dare to say that you and I would have seen a child,
yes.
Had we been looking at the same situation,
absolutely,
and that would have completely changed the outcome, and things like that aren't something that you can just ignore. There's evidence that dehumanization of children leads to the perception of black children as monkeys or apes. Mm-hmm. And when you don't see something as human or as part of your own species, then it becomes that much easier to treat them with harshness and with disregard. And I feel like that is definitely something that we see and that we experience in the black community in just way too many numbers.
But I mean, the abolishment of slavery was not really that long ago. If you look at the time frame thing, let's not even talk about the civil rights era. What was it, the 60s? We're not that, we haven't come that far.
Right.
So there is still residue of that stuff that still innately moves into our everyday society and lived life and lived experiences. Yeah. Sadly, even if you're looking at maternal mental health and wellness, you see they don't even perceive that black women perceive pain the same way. I have had more than one black woman in therapy talk about their birthing trauma where they told people they were in pain, they could feel them cutting them, and they still would not give them the medication that they needed to help reduce that pain.
They see them as more tolerant of
They
that
see
pain
them as more tolerant.
Or not,
and they know that it's
nurturing.
not true, but that's been their lived experience. And I could see if it was like one or two or three, but I've had a plethora of real birthing trauma.
Yeah.
And, and that's supposed to be a safe, sacred space. It's supposed to be a place of joy, these women are so traumatized, they're afraid to have children again because they don't want to have that experience. Yeah. Or they change their whole birthing experience where we're going to birth at home, we're going to use a doula, we're going to do stuff a lot different because the seriousness of our circumstance wasn't perceived by the people who were supposed to be advocating for us, protecting us, healing us, and repairing us.
Right. And yes, oh my goodness, I've heard of that for so long, and it just takes you all the way back to when they were doing experiments on black, and it's sad that kind of perception can be maintained and persisted through so many generations to where it becomes a systematic problem. And I feel like systematic problems, a lot of times they need systematic solutions to truly address and to remedy them. But I feel like the first issue in the midst of all of this is to get people to believe that it is real, and to see that it is there. And it's very important to have these kinds of discussions because a lot of times people just don't know, and they can feign ignorance.
And that's exactly what popped into my head: feigned ignorance.
Yeah.
Like people say, I think people don't understand things until it becomes their lived experience, until it is their own family member, their own child, their own sibling, their own loved one or dear friend. I don't know if it becomes personal until they've had those experiences or they've walked with a person going through those experiences. And I think that's the challenge, because not all the time would an ally want to walk those experiences or live those experiences. So
it's scary. I mean, I guess, like as a child, had you ever had any direct experience where you faced like a difference in treatment from the people who were your administrators or your caretakers around you, just
Absolutely.
because you were black?
Well, listen, we're talking about black, but how about the fact of black within black? How about colorism? You know what
Yeah.
I mean? We could talk about that. I come from culturally a West Indian background, Jamaican parents, and even that is a residue of racism, of slavery, and light skin. Can we say niggers? Light skinned black people are in the house, darker skinned black people are in the fields. And, even that, the paper bag test. Remember the test?
Oh, yeah.
If you're darker than a paper bag, your jacket's about a paper bag.
Right, you're
Yeah,
dark,
I
you're
wouldn't be
dark.
considered.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be considered because I was darker than a paper bag. And, so I heard a lot of that growing up. I heard a lot of, you're fat and you're black and you're not going to amount to anything. I heard a lot of who would value you. I heard a lot of things that would definitely deter anyone who isn't tenacious or who isn't, who doesn't have enough self-esteem or wherewithal about them. Now, where I got it, I have no idea. My mother was very vicious about her kids in regards to strengthening them, but she wasn't like a loving nurturer, like, come here. That wasn't her personality, but she did teach me about entrepreneurship early. She did teach me about being resilient early, but I grew up in the middle of Brownsville, Brooklyn. It's a tough neighborhood to be in.
Got thick skin.
And so you learn the hard way. And my thing is, I didn't allow that stuff to stop me. Today, I am 5-time best-selling author. I have been on the news every other week. I have presented in front of hundreds, if not thousands of people. I teach at a university. I have a decent real estate portfolio. I do all the things that I want to do. I travel. I bought a house in Italy this year.
Congratulations.
Okay? And none of the things that I ever thought I could do because I heard someone tell me I can do it besides my mother. But if I left it to society, I would have felt like I wasn't enough and I couldn't do it. And I'm the type of person, I'm a Capricorn. I'm not going to let anyone tell me or dictate what my life is going to look like.
Right.
And I determined for myself, wealth wasn't just about being financially stable. Wealth for me was being in charge of my own time. And so I worked towards that. And I have a wonderful family and I have wonderful people around me that I've curated to be around me. But that takes going through a lot of things that aren't so great. People are disgusting. You are overly sexualized, not just by friends, especially me as a young girl. I developed body very early. And, by friends, by family members. You're just looking at people like, dude, you're like supposed to be my uncle. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
So it definitely is challenging, but it's not impossible. I would say young girls shouldn't have to go through those things, but the reality of life, it is the truth of the matter. And that's kind of where we are unless we change that. And what I do with my young ladies is we have conversations. We talk about self-esteem and self-compassion. We talk about the things that, we talk about their value and how they want to be valued and teaching people how to treat them.
Right. That's a beautiful answer.
Thank you.
No, thank you. That was a fantastic response to that question. Thank you for sharing so much about your story. I'm definitely very impressed at the way that you've been able to take the obstacles that you faced and you've turned it into, really, trophies and really just greater platforms to take you higher. I definitely want to learn more about your organization, and I look forward to learning more as we speak more. So with that, we've wrapped up kind of part one of this discussion on touching on the treatment of Black girls, prior to reaching college. And I definitely thank you, Natalie, for coming in to help us to navigate that. Were there any, I guess, like maybe parting words or anything that you wanted to leave the people with before you headed out? Or
just want to say that people should allow themselves time. I think people want everything to happen all at one time, and you have to give yourself time. You have to allow yourself some grace, and you have to allow grace for others too, because change isn't easy. But if there is an element to want to change, that's the most important thing.
Right. I definitely agree with that one. So, with that, we're going to take a brief intermission, and we will be back to continue this discussion on Black culture as it pertains to Black women and their pursuit of success through education. So stick with us.
Looking for true authentic taste? Come to China. Looking for food with history? Come to China. For customer service like no other, come to China. China Restaurant, your destination for excellent Chinese cuisine. And don't hesitate to visit our website to see our vast selection of dishes, or come to our location at 2816 Washington Road in Augusta, Georgia. We'll see you there.
All right, everyone, welcome back. You were here with us at In-Depth Connections, a Black Light for the Culture. We're coming back from a brief intermission. We just got done talking about the treatment of Black girls prior to reaching college. And this is all in support of our discussion around Black culture as it pertains to Black women and their pursuit of success through education. So here with me, I've got Miss Morgan Boyd. She is an author and political activist, and she is going to help us to further unpack this discussion. So if you would like to tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I am definitely so happy to be here. But I am originally from the south side of Chicago, and I came to Augusta, Georgia as a teacher, actually. And so once I saw some of the things that was going on in the education system, I got out of the education system and jumped into politics, which still to be seen if that was a good decision or not. This is a topic that I'm very passionate about as someone who went through the education system, public education system, and pursued my bachelor's and then my master's. This is definitely a very important topic.
Yes, I definitely agree. I guess for this portion of the discussion, we really want to talk about some of the difficulties that Black women experience once getting into college. So I just want to ask you, once making it to college, what was your experience as a Black woman pursuing a master's degree?
Okay, yeah, sure. So I had a unique experience. I went to two predominantly white institutions, and so in those spaces particularly, you often find yourself with a very scarce number of students that look like you. So these are spaces where Black women are few and far between, if you will. So you can go through things like feeling isolated. You try to relate with your professors, and at times you can't. So some of the issues that you're dealing with, you really don't find, that support that you might find at maybe a HBCU or in a different arena.
Yeah, no. I know I had been kind of looking into this myself, and there's a doctor out there named Chai Crowder, and one of the things that she highlighted as some of the biggest things that are kind of fueling the difficulties that Black women face in academic spaces is that lack of representation, and also just having those experiences that tend to undermine the Black woman's experience as they try to pursue things like higher positions within academia, such as like tenureship. There's a statistic out there that is verifiable. Black women make up about 3.7% of tenured professors, and that's all universities across the country. So how does hearing a statistic like that make you feel?
It makes perfect sense to me. I can count on one hand the number of Black professors, Black female professors that I had in both my undergraduate and postgraduate experiences. So for one, it definitely makes sense. And then, it's interesting to me because something that people say all the time is that Black women go for their secondary degrees at a higher rate than Black men. And so if that is the case, it's interesting to me then that there's such a small percentage of teachers who are actually Black women, if we make up most of the people that are pursuing that educational degree. And I think it then is like this vicious cycle, because if you have a very small percentage of Black females who are professors, then you go into my experience where I went into classrooms and I didn't see someone looking like me teaching the class. You know, couldn't find that solace in sisterhood or mentorship with someone that looked like me. So it makes sense, though, in the arenas that I've been in.
Okay. I find that to be very interesting as well, that you don't really have that representation, even though you have probably twice as many Black women that are pursuing higher education and continued education. So I guess with that, I wanted to ask, like, would you recommend that Black women follow in your footsteps and follow the path that you've taken? And if so, if not, why would you say that?
So it's a difficult thing, because I do believe in alternative ways. I think that the debt that is created by higher education pursuit is taxing, and it's a very difficult thing that can get in the way of a lot of wealth building things for American citizens. You buy the house, you build the equity. This is kind of the blueprint to how you build wealth in America. And when you have the student loan debt, it can really get in the way of that. So that kind of gives me pause. But at the same time, when we being Black women, when we're in these professional spaces, that is something that, being your education sheet, that's something that really is a deterrent even to the door. So unfortunately, as Black women, I do think we need it almost, depending on what arena you're trying to get into. So when they see that you're a Black woman, it's almost like a strike against you. You're already a foot behind the race. Yeah. So where you went to school and how far you went in school, a lot of times is necessary for us, which is unfortunate, because it's like a double-edged sword. Mm-hmm. So I guess the short answer would be, it depends on the field that you're pursuing, is what I would say.
So what's your field?
So I was in education. I wanted to actually be a professor, so I knew that I would need a pretty high degree of institutional education.
Right. You say wanted. So is that something that's changed, or?
Yes, it's definitely changed for me. Starting off with the lower education system, so elementary school, high school, I strongly disagree with these institutions and how they're constructed, how the material is taught. And so I've been very turned off by the education system in America. And then when you look at student loan debt and how it's crippling the millennial generation, I think it also gives me pause with even higher education, because there's no way that you should not have a barrier to buying your first home because you have student loan debt. And so when you look at things like that, it makes me really look at the system as a whole differently. So no, I don't think I would be a professor anymore. But yeah, so if you're in the medical field, if you're wanting to be in the education field, if you're wanting to be in certain corporate fields, then your degree matters, unfortunately, in this country.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I guess what is our path forward? If I guess you say that it's almost necessary for Black women to have that degree, and you say that you at one point you wanted to become a professor, and you decided not to because of, it almost seems like the I guess maybe the lack of representation, or the lack of allegiance that you were able to find for people that would support I guess the causes that you found to be just. So what would be the path forward for, I guess, like making a way for us to advocate in that space?
Sure. So I think until we lower the barriers for higher education, then we can't really get into a conversation about what would be fair. So meaning the cost of education in this country is too high. That's just out the gate. Yeah. And so
I would agree.
Beyond that, it's like Oh, I slid. I slid. My bad.
There you go.
He's got his.
No, you're not. Please don't address it.
Okay.
See it, like, at all.
Okay, that's the point of the iPad.
Yeah, you're all good. What was it now?
I was just asking me this.
Am I the one that needs to slide?
Oh, yeah, just,
My God, we
And
need
then
like
and then I
tape or
pointed
a
it
bar,
out.
or we need like maybe an invisible string.
if you slide back just a little bit
It's back or left?
this way,
Okay.
then you
Is
should
that-
be good.
is that-
That should give you guys at least a little bit.
Not
of
where I
time.
need to be.
But yeah. Alright. You guys are doing great.
All right,
By the
cool.
way.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. I didn't get the chance to see the highlights we kind of put together, but it spruces it up.
Yeah, good.
Okay, so so where were we? So the path forward.
The path forward, yes. So I do believe that that the higher education system, the cost of it is just too high. It's costing your access to home ownership. It's costing your debt. What is it called? Your credit. Your credit is affected by this. So the cost of it is too high. The second thing is I feel this way about justice impacted people. I don't think that somebody should look at where you went to school and that should determine your value in terms of seeking employment. I think that's crazy. I think your experience should far outweigh your education, because the truth of the matter is a lot of people pay their way to their education, and that's just the truth in this country. So as we know, Black people, we don't have that generational wealth that was taken from us when they burned down the farms that they couldn't work, and Black people were building their wealth off of that in the 20s. And through the Reconstruction era, they completely erased our generational wealth. So we don't have that. And so, to try to put us in a race where we're already starting so far behind, I just don't even know where to start. So maybe lowering the costs would be one way, and just not saying that your value is based on where you went to school, because then that gets into the argument of, okay, well, an HBCU is an HBCU on paper. If you have a candidate that went to Harvard and a candidate that went to Morgan State, you're judging them based on where they went, but what about what they're bringing to the table?
Right.
So I think it's it's another rigged institution.
And before I really respond to that, you said justice impacted.
Mm-hmm.
What is that terminology?
Sure. So with somebody that has a felony record, if that is seen on a job application, then they automatically are judged in so many different ways, and a lot of times they don't even get the opportunity just based off of that one thing. And so that's it's a very extreme comparison or example, but that's something that
it's really hard to get away from that pedigree-driven kind of notion of fairness and what someone deserves, because those people do pay so much to go to these schools, and so their expectation is that it's going to give them almost like an automatic sense of access to a certain degree. But it is unfortunate, I feel like, how it does tend to make things so topsy-turvy, and you can have somebody who has worked their life, you know what I'm saying, they've given everything that they can to getting a degree or to getting a doctorate from a university, and to have someone scoff at it just because of, what the name of the university itself is.
Exactly. Something else that's really interesting to me is a lot of people talk about going to these colleges to get access to the network. And that's interesting to me because I have been in the professional arena for 8 years, and I have never once gotten any type of opportunity based on my collegiate network. There's always been networks outside of school. So I just think that that's interesting as well. Right.
is what I feel like most people say when they can get to that crossroad to when they can put themselves ahead and make things more fair. So that is very unfortunate. So I guess when it comes to, I guess, taking yourself from having that higher education and moving into the workspace, really one of the biggest things that I feel Black women experience is disparities in pay. Fighting for equal pay or fighting to be able to hold down a job that, say a white male was able to get with a GED. They may need a bachelor's degree just to be able to do the same thing. I guess, what's your impression of the climate around, Black women in pay in the workplace?
Ooh, okay.
Got some thoughts?
Yeah, I do have some thoughts. I got to be careful with my thoughts on this one. But something that was interesting. So I told you I started out as a teacher, and that was an industry that is grossly dominated by women. Black women for sure in this city, but in large, women. And it's one of the most underpaid industries in all of the industries, really. I think when I started in 2017, I was making $33,000 a year. So it's just interesting that the industry that is predominantly female is one of the lowest paid. And so I think when you get into these spaces, a lot of people like to say, well, there was affirmative action, and it's so much,
kill it now.
It's so much, right. It's so much better now. You guys have plenty of opportunities. And it looks like that on the outside, but once you get into these arenas, the pay is not the same. The pay is not equal. And a lot of times as a Black woman, when you speak up and when you start to speak up for yourself, you're seen as the angry Black woman, or you're stereotyped, and you really put yourself at risk of even losing your job for speaking up. So it's a very difficult place to be in, especially when you are oftentimes managed by men who are less educated than you. And then you look at all this 3-figure loan debt, and you're like, well, what was that for then? Like, this guy got here because he graduated high school. So I think it can be a really frustrating place for a lot of Black women. And I think it, honestly, and I'll just talk to my experience, it really causes a lot of trauma in the workplace because you start to doubt yourself. You're not being paid for what you feel you're worth, and that can be really damaging. Yeah. Not to mention, a lot of Black women already carry so much trauma from childhood, and I think a lot of these employers really use that against women, because women don't want to speak up, and so they'll put more work on you for the less pay, and they'll get away with it. So it's a very tough thing, and I think that women in the workplace need a lot more advocacy.
Yeah, I guess, do you have any personal experiences where you've directly tried to vow for or to go for a promotion or a raise, and you had it slapped down, or you had something kind of funny or anything like that happen as a result?
Yeah, sure. So I was promoted. I had a promotion. And the pay was only going to be increased by a very small amount, but the work was going to triple. And so I had to make a decision. I had to decide if I was going to advocate for myself or if I was just going to take what was given to me. And so I decided to advocate for myself. And when I went to my boss and said what I believed would be fair for the role, that was shot down. So I had to go above my boss. I had to go to the board, and I had to really learn how to speak up for myself. And I think it can be a really difficult thing, like the situation with the woman that took her life at Lincoln University. People don't realize how traumatic these experiences can be, but you feel very isolated. You have someone over you that has control of your job, and really you have family that you have to think about, and so it's a scary thing. And so when you are going to bat for yourself, you also think, like I said, of all the stereotypes. Oh, well, they're just going to perceive me as the angry Black woman, right. Or a lot of times you're the only Black woman in the room or in the company. Right. And so you're also thinking well, I'm paving a way for other Black women. maybe I just need to be quiet and take it, and hopefully she can get better than I did. But I think it's going to really take advocacy. It's going to take women in the workplace feeling like they have a voice. It's going to take them understanding their worth and not taking anything less than what they're worth.
And so what was the outcome of your situation?
I got the pay increase that I deserved.
You got what you were
Yeah.
worth. Okay, that's definitely good to hear.
Yeah.
And you touched on Dr. Bailey and her situation at Lincoln University, and rest her heart. But that is such a very unfortunate situation. And while it doesn't necessarily involve pay, I feel like it involves a lot of the stressors and the microaggressions that Black women tend to face within the workplace. I don't know if you've looked into like who she was, but she had worked at that university for 20 years, and she had reached a position of senior administrative leadership. But if you look into who she was as a person, the entire basis of who she was as a doctor, her whole thesis dissertation was based on identifying the microaggressions and the factors that block Black women from being successful and that keep them from wanting to speak up and to fight for those positions. Her thesis dissertation was called "My Sister, Myself: Identifying Factors That Block Black Women's Success," and it was all about essentially what she was trying to fight for in her own personal situation. And in a lot of ways, you can almost look at it as like the culmination of everything that she's spent so much of her life fighting and advocating for. And in a lot of ways, it was almost like a shameful outcome for her, the way that, they, said that her allegations were unsubstantiated, and that, then they moved to terminate her, very shortly afterwards. It was kind of just like one of the worst ways that you could get responded to when the entire basis of who your identity is an advocate for, making sure that these kinds of things don't happen. And you just had, an entire group of people say that it didn't happen. And that was kind of just like the echo of what the whole issue was. And I just feel like it's just one of the most just tragic things that you could see, but it's almost like her life is a testament to what she advocated for. So
Absolutely.
It's almost like a beautiful tragedy, if you could say, if that's okay to say. But I guess. Yeah.
Well, I think the saddest part about that situation to me, and it also goes into an issue that Black women in the workplace face. She asked for help. She reached out. She said, "Hey, this is going on. I can't take this." She reached out on multiple occasions and nobody helped her. And I think Black women, we have the stereotype of being so strong, or, we can just take so much that, I think that is also a big hindrance for Black women in the workplace, because I've talked to so many of my friends who are in high management positions or in these really high stress jobs, and they just get work piled on them because we can take it, we can handle it. And so, I think that Black women in the workplace, we really do need people to stand up and advocate. And that was a tragic situation, but I think it's starting to shed light on what's really going on in these spaces.
You look at the person who I guess was her aggressor, the person who, turned her into a victim. You look at what that gentleman looks like, and he's blonde haired, blue eyed, and
and the president of an HBCU.
He's the president of an HBCU.
Okay.
Let's start
Okay.
there. Where are we really wanting to start this conversation?
Yeah.
Because how does that even work? Who elected you? You know what I'm saying? Because I just would like to know who would vote.
Yeah,
for
like,
you.
is this your president?
But,
for real?
And that is a whole discussion in and of itself.
We'll table that one.
Right, because when you follow the paper trail, it doesn't really take you to places that you necessarily want to go.
Exactly.
But that also, that's I feel like that's an echoed theme that you see not just at Lincoln University, but you see it, and that is a HBCU. But look at what happened at Harvard with Claudine Gay. She was the first Black president, not just female or black female. She was the very first black president of Harvard University, and she was in that station for all of a year. And she faced more backlash, more criticism, more active, and I would say like systematic attacks on her character than anyone ever had in the history of Harvard. And this was all to not only come against her, but to come against the entire notion of DEI, or diversity, equity, and inclusion. What are your thoughts on something like that?
Yeah, so I think, America is very systematic. And I think that Black women were never meant to be in these roles. Black women were never meant to lead and to run companies and run organizations. And so when Black women do get into these spaces, I think it really challenges the status quo of America. And so, it's very unfortunate and it's very antiquated, but that's the reality. So I don't care how much affirmative action you have or how many Black women go to college and get their degrees. The fabric of America is founded and woven on racism, and that's just the truth of it. And so Black women being in positions of power really threatens the power dynamic in America. And so when this educated Black woman became the president of Harvard University, one of the most prestigious universities in all of America, that threatens a lot of people. And so, I think it was a very political and strategic attack. And it's like once you break their stereotypes and their molds that they want you to fit in, then it's like, okay, well, what else do you have to say? What else do you got? So I feel it was a way of shutting down the Black girl magic in a way.
I definitely agree. It was more to send a statement than anything else. And it's unfortunate that she did end up having to step down and resign because of the personal stress that it was and the strife that it was bringing into her life. But you're exactly right. It's something that challenged the status quo, and it was something that threatens a strong-held notion that Black women are not welcome in those spaces and Black women are not welcome in those roles. And I feel like the statistics, it does reflect that. But I feel like over time, it's something that is going to change. It's going to change because it has to change, and because there's nothing that is truly at the end of the day able to stop a Black woman, because that is probably the strongest thing known to man.
I think that's one of my most admired quality in our people is the in spite of quality. And yeah, exactly like you said. Yeah, maybe you were able to remove Claudine Gay by intimidation, but just because Claudine Gay held that seat, there are so many other young Black women that now know that there's a lane there. And so it's only a matter of time.
Absolutely. I feel like the statement and the message that she sent by just reaching that level was 10 times as powerful as the statement that they wanted to send by removing her from that station.
100%.
All right. So earlier, you mentioned something very interesting, and you mentioned affirmative action. Okay. So it's the age-old question. What's your stance on affirmative action? How do you feel about it?
Well, okay. I had a few conversations around this when it first happened, and my stance, I thought it may actually be good because I thought it may have the effect of pushing more Black students to go to HBCUs. The difficulty with that is the underfunding that happens for HBCUs. And regardless, I think it is absolutely needed because it levels the playing field. Yeah. So while I was kind of feeling like, oh, well, this could be good for HBCUs, I don't think that a student should have to go to an HBCU if they don't want to. Yeah. They should have a choice, just like anybody else does. So I think affirmative action is needed. I mean, the percentage of Black students in college is so small that I don't get how you I don't understand how you could even argue against affirmative action. It blows my mind.
Yeah, I agree. I'm a very strong supporter of affirmative action. I would say that the oppositionary forces to diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, they maintain this notion of racial colorblindness. Have you ever heard the term racial colorblind? And it's just this ridiculous idea that it's just an equal playing field in the educational space. You know, once you go into the school, somehow everything just became equal, and you know, we're not going to take into consideration any of the societal or the any of the other factors that impact your ability to show up and that impact you when you go home. I think it's absolutely insane to think that something like that doesn't have a very strong implication on just the sheer number of people that are even able to make it to that level.
Yeah.
It's about representation, in my opinion. And I think representation a lot of times is super important for creating the overarching outcomes that we really want to see. If you want to see, in earnest, this percentage of whatever population being there, then you have to show them that percentage of population can be there. I feel like there's nothing wrong with that.
In my cohort that I just graduated from in January for my master's, there were...
Congratulations.
Thank you. I appreciate that. There were about 5 black students, 3 of which were female, and that's out of almost 50 students. Yeah. So, the numbers, just walking into these rooms, I mean, you can see the disparity. So, and America is not a colorblind society. So I think the notion of colorblind it's like a what do they call those movies? Utopian. It's a utopian concept. Now, while it would be great to get there, we're nowhere near there. So, yeah, I think, and the same thing happened. So the organization, and it slips my mind at the moment, but I applied for a grant through them, so I don't know how, I can't remember, but it's an Atlanta-based black woman-led organization that gives grants to black women businesses. And they shut them down and saying that it was reverse racism, that because they gave to black women-led organizations that it was discriminatory. And it's just interesting because when you look at the data, when you look at I think it's like less than 3% of black women businesses get capital funding. It might be, I would have to double check the numbers, but I know it's less than 3%. Yeah. And so when you look at the data, I genuinely do not understand how you could even argue, because the playing field is not even.
Yeah.
The starting line is not even.
And I would bet my arm and my leg you could find several organizations that they're exclusive to their own population or their own culture, their own group, but maybe they're not as intentional with their wording about who it's for and things of that nature, but you just don't tend to see anybody but them show up. And it's like, how can we create things like that unless we are intentional about it? And I feel like that is the caveat of looking at black culture and black people, is that you have to be intentional. And I say this all the time, you have to be intentional about what it is that you do, because there are so many things that are out there working overtime to knock us off, to distract us, to subvert us, and to keep us from creating anything lasting within our community. And it's like... Man, it's a riddle. I mean, I wouldn't say that I have the answer, but I do know that is just it's almost like not fair. It's kind of what I want to say, because for them to shut them down for what they can call reverse racism or discrimination, it kind of ignores the fact that there is a necessity for what this is bringing to the community.
Absolutely.
So outside of this technical notion of discrimination and what's happening within these 4 doors, or 4 walls, let's not act like there aren't 100 other places for the people that you're claiming that we're discriminating against that they can go to get what they need, whereas for us to get what we need, we have a handful of places. And so while you may be able to substantiate a claim of discrimination in a sense, it's not malicious in the way that it tends to be used to get things like that shut down. And I hate to see stuff like that. And it's hard to figure out, where do you even start? How do you even protect something like that? Does it start with policy? Does it, where do you go? What do you do?
But I like what you said about being intentional, and I think you asked a question earlier about where to start in the education field, and I think that you do have to be intentional. And like, for example, to keep costs down, you could stay in state. You can find a great school in your state so that you can do in-state tuition. There are a lot of different scholarships that you can apply for. The unfortunate truth, and it's just the truth, we have to work twice as hard to get the same thing. And so my encouragement to any sophomore, juniors in high school is to really apply for as many scholarships as you can. Look at in-state options. And I do think that getting your education, if that is something that you're passionate about, is worth it. I think I learned a lot of very valuable lessons at my PWIs about America and how to navigate society. I do agree I made some lasting connections, maybe not professional, but personal, that have been really great for me.
Where'd you go to school, if you don't mind me asking?
Oh, yeah. I went to Oglethorpe University for undergraduate and then Queen's University of Charlotte for my MFA.
Nice.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I plan to apply to Columbia for my PhD.
Okay, you better go ahead. Yeah, I went to NC State for my undergrad, so go Pack. And I recently got accepted into a master's program at Augusta University.
Oh,
so,
cool! Awesome,
yeah,
awesome.
Yeah, all for Black representation in education. So
Absolutely.
I'm always representing. You can count on that.
But definitely I love that. And I would say do your research on the university, do your research on how they treat students of color, what are their stances on DEI, and because there are some good universities out there.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. You definitely have to do your research. But I definitely want to touch on, some of the solutions to, I guess, the access that Black women traditionally have not had to education, to economic power. So this is taken from a very powerful article that is called "Increasing Black Women's Access to Education and Economic Power." The name of the artist, I don't want to mess it up. I don't want to get it wrong. Hold up. So actually, I know I have it right here with me. Salma Alakbawi. So she's a very influential Black author who writes different pieces like this that bring awareness to different socioeconomic issues that Black women face. But yeah, so with that, it's important to kind of talk about the solutions. And so when it comes to education, some solutions that we have can be around policy. And so investing in educational equality, addressing funding disparities between schools, and eliminating the school-to-prison pipeline are some things that we can do as a community to provide solutions to those barriers to education. Student parents, so collecting data and allocating resources to support childcare and housing for Black student mothers, because that's something that is traditionally a very hard to acquire resource within the Black community, and one that is always in need. Debt, cancel student debt to remove that major hurdle to general wealth building or generational wealth building within the Black community. Talking about economic power, workforce development, so putting a focus on workforce development, providing opportunities for advancement in leadership roles for Black women in companies. That's very important at changing this narrative around Black women and their access to education and economic power. And also pay equity, enforcing equal pay and closing the racial wealth gap. There are, legislation and laws that we are advocating for that we can put in place to ensure that there is equity within the workplace. It should never be the case that a black woman should have to work for 21 and a half months to earn the same kind of wage that a white male would earn. There's no reason why a black woman should have to go to get a bachelor's degree to do the same thing that a white male can do with a high school diploma or a GED. And so creating equity within those spaces is very important, and legislation is a very important driver to protecting those spaces.
I want to touch on something with legislation, and I'm glad you say that. So prison to pipeline is absolutely what the education system is right now. But it also is prison to a pipeline to low or minimum wage jobs. Mm-hmm. And, the minimum wage in Georgia has not been changed in over 2 decades. Mm-hmm. So it's a system that's set up for our black girls to fail. Yeah. And so when you are looking at third grade reading scores to determine your prison population, I think that there's something incredibly wrong with that. And when you have 6th, 7th, 8th graders that can't read or they read on a kindergarten level, then I think, when do you look at the system as a whole and say that we just need to do something different? I think that education is really missing that humanity piece. I had so many students who came to school and they're either taking care of their 4 and 5 younger siblings, or they don't have a home. They don't know where they're going literally to sleep tonight. And so when you are just feeding them facts and information all day and you are not considering the mental state of the child, then, I think that you're already starting off losing. And so, I think back to, Lucy Laney, let's say, for example, that started the schools here, or the Black Panther Party, how they focused on feeding the children before they went to school. That was like one of their biggest efforts in the community. These are spaces where they really cared about the child first. And so I think there needs to be humanity put back into these school systems. Richmond County is over 90% black students. And so there are so many issues that young black people face. PTSD. They're over medicating these students, ADHD. And I had students who could barely stay awake because they were on so many different types of medications. So, I think when it comes to education, we really have to take a look at what is happening with our students. And if we're not willing to take a radical shift in how we're educating these kids, then we're just being complicit in a system that is absolutely a pipeline to prison and a pipeline to minimum wage jobs. Yeah. And so I am very, very passionate about that. And I think, like you said, it starts with legislation. Yeah. First of all, minimum wage absolutely should have been raised in Georgia a long time ago. Right. So why is it still not raised, even with inflation? Right. So that's legislative. Yeah. The schools, the way that they test and determine the funding off of the testing, that's legislative. So, I could talk all day about education.
Yeah, no, and oh my God, there's so many things wrong with the processes that literally reinforce every notion of systematic racism. Mm-hmm. You just wouldn't believe when you pull the lid off of some of that stuff. Like when you're talking about the test scores to determine funding, like that is probably like one of the realest things out there. But it's so topsy-turvy because kids who are earning the most don't need the most resources. It's the one who are doing the worst that need the most resources and the most support. And it's so backwards that literally the way that it's written in policy is that the kids who can't get it won't get it. Mm-hmm. Like
that good old No Child Left Behind. That's where it started.
Yeah. Right. Right. What child you talking about? Not my child.
Right.
But yeah, no, that you're definitely right there. And overall, I think one of the most important things is to be mindful of the intersectionality of the issues and the struggles that we face. Understanding that gender plus race creates unique experiences, especially for Black women, and that you need to be mindful and cognizant of those things, and you need to be willing to listen to the struggles, because they will tell you, and you need to take those things seriously, because a lot of times the people who are in positions of power and in positions to change these things don't look like the people who are suffering, whether it be someone who isn't of the same gender or the same race, and so that can tend to create a disconnect in terms of what someone is willing to do for another.
Absolutely.
And also just understanding that empowering Black women is good for everyone. It benefits everybody. It makes the entire community better. And that is a mindset that needs to be instilled within, I feel like first and foremost, Black women need to understand that they deserve to be empowered more. And the people around them need to understand that empowering Black women does not take power away from you. It does not take 100%. Power away from anyone else. It solely and simply empowers Black women. And that's something that needs to be a priority. And I feel like changing that portion of the narrative, it can have a very powerful impact on, what people see, what people say, and what people do.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel very strongly that there's been a creation of a culture pitting Black men and Black women against each other. And so that's a whole nother podcast in and of itself, trust. But just to keep it very brief, you're absolutely right. Georgia, the domestic violence rate in Georgia has been up 22% since 2012. So just as a small example, so there are so many pockets of things that Black women are facing, and that, it's not being talked about a lot. And so, I think you're absolutely right. Empowerment is absolutely key. And when you talk about empowerment, you're talking about giving a person the resources they need to really pursue the things that they want to pursue. And I think when you do have a generation of women who are empowered, to your point, I think that is definitely a huge step in healing a lot of these issues that we see in our community. For our children, for our Black men. And so I think the empowerment of Black women is something I'm so passionate about, because I agree. I think that is where a good place to start in healing our community.
Right. I definitely agree with you. But yeah, no, this has been a very beautiful discussion on Black culture and how it affects Black women in their pursuit of success through education.
Yes, I've learned some great things.
That's good. If you could learn just one thing, like that is the goal. I have accomplished it. I guess, were there any parting thoughts or anything that you wanted to leave the people with, or?
Yeah, I love what you just said. Empowering Black women is not taking power from anyone else. And in spite of the things that Black women have accomplished, in spite of everything that we've been through historically in this country, it just goes to show how powerful and impactful we really are. And so empowering Black women can absolutely change our society for the better.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I totally agree.